Windsor Castle has just confirmed that he died this morning. His health had been deteriorating in recent months with several visits to the hospital.
Windsor Castle fell silent as the nation held its breath. King Charles was gone, and the world didn't see it coming. In the early hours, as dawn barely touched the horizon, Britain woke to a message it never thought it would hear so soon. The somber announcement slipped across newswires with an almost cruel calmness. His Majesty King Charles III passed away peacefully this morning. Within moments, shockwaves rippled from the palace gates through streets lined with stunned citizens and screens glowing in countless homes. His health had been a subject of quiet speculation for months, whispered in corners of newsrooms and behind royal curtains, yet many still clung to the belief that he would prevail. He had, after all, appeared only days earlier at public events, frail but resolute, raising his hand in acknowledgment of the cheering crowds. How could a man who smiled through his struggle and stood so firm in the face of illness vanish so suddenly? Questions multiplied faster than answers. Behind the walls of Windsor, aides moved like shadows, their faces heavy with sorrow but their lips sealed. There were murmurs of a hushed midnight phone call, frantic but contained. Insiders spoke of a sudden turn, of medical staff ushered quietly to Balmoral under the cover of darkness, of family members gathered at his bedside before the end. But no one outside that circle truly knew what had transpired in those final hours, and perhaps no one ever would. What was certain, however, was that the calm exterior of the monarchy so carefully maintained had cracked at that moment, revealing raw grief and a sense of urgency that could not be ignored. In those early hours, disbelief clung stubbornly to the air. The public groped for answers, scrolling through headlines and replaying clips of the king from just days prior, standing in his tailored suit, a faint smile playing at his lips. Speaking about resilience and family, his presence seemed eternal, his duty a shield that no illness could pierce. Yet here it was, confirmation that even the crown cannot hold back time, that even kings fall. What then had happened that night? What chain of events unfolded behind the grand doors of Balmoral and Windsor that reshaped the monarchy in an instant? Hints of secrecy surrounded every detail that trickled out, as though the palace sought to protect not just the dignity of the departed but the fragile order of succession that lay ahead. Officials issued statements filled with solemnity but sparse on specifics. One aide reportedly remarked, "It was peaceful, but it was fast. None of us were ready." That single sentence carried all the weight of a family in mourning, of a nation stunned into silence, and of a future rushing in before anyone could catch their breath. But the story of that night wasn't just about death, it was about the dawn of a new reign born in grief. Before he was king, he was a father, and William knew the weight of both roles. In the quiet hours before dawn, as the enormity of the news settled like a storm over Windsor, memories of 1,000 private moments between father and son rose to the surface. To the world, King Charles was a monarch, a symbol of stability and duty. But to William, he was simply the man who taught him how to carry the crushing expectations of royalty without losing his humanity. Throughout his illness, William was there, walking with him through gardens when the cameras were gone, offering a quiet presence when words fell short. They spoke of family, of legacy, of fears neither could name aloud. Those final months revealed a side of Charles few had ever seen, vulnerable yet unshaken, clinging to the steady comfort of his son's unwavering loyalty. Palace insiders spoke of evenings when William would sit beside him for hours, his voice low, sometimes just silence between them, enough to remind Charles he was not alone in the fight. And even when the pain sharpened and the treatment left him weakened, Charles drew strength from knowing his son was ready to step forward when the moment came. In interviews, Charles never failed to praise William's devotion. "He has never shied away from the weight," Charles said once, his voice thick with quiet pride. "In him, I see the future steady, compassionate, strong." Those words, once a blessing, now echoed like a farewell. For William, hearing them was both a comfort and a burden. In that fragile space between duty and grief, he felt their truth more deeply than ever. And when the call finally came, when the hushed voice over the phone delivered the news no son wanted to hear, William turned to Catherine and whispered through tears, "We have to be strong for them now." It was not just a resolve for his children, but for the entire kingdom that looked to him in its darkest hour. Even in his own heartbreak, he understood the world was watching, waiting for him to stand where his father no longer could. There, Behind the formal statements and polished appearances lay a grief stripped of crowns and titles, a son mourning his father, a man trying to honor both the personal loss and the public expectation. Yet behind the heartbreak, an unstoppable royal machine prepared for what came next. Even as he smiled in public, Charles carried a private battle few could imagine. Beneath the polished speeches and steady wave of his hand, his body was fighting against time. In February 2024, the palace finally acknowledged what many had feared: a cancer diagnosis, discovered during treatment for what had been called a routine procedure. At first, the news was tempered with reassurance. Charles, they said, was responding well to treatment. He carried on with his duties, determined to prove that nothing, not even illness, could keep him from serving the crown. But as weeks became months, those who watched closely began to notice the change. His steps grew slower, his face thinner, his voice just slightly more fragile than before. By the summer of 2025, the strain could no longer be disguised. In July, he appeared at 2 public events, back-to-back, dressed impeccably, greeting dignitaries, offering that familiar faint smile. But those close enough to observe noticed how he leaned more heavily on aids, how he seemed to save his strength for the cameras and collapsed into silence once away from them. Each appearance became a quiet testament to his resolve and to his vulnerability. What the public saw was a king clinging to duty. What his family saw was a man wearing himself down. His last public engagement came just days before the end. A garden ceremony at Highgrove. On the surface, it was routine, unremarkable except for the unspoken acknowledgment that this might be his final bow. Those closest to him later admitted they felt it too, that subtle farewell embedded in every glance and gesture. But still, no one could say it out loud. No one dared to break the spell of hope he insisted on maintaining. All the while, the media churned with speculation. Rumors of his imminent death surfaced more than once, splashed across headlines and swiftly denied by the palace. Nothing more than vicious gossip, officials called them in March. And yet, behind the walls of Balmoral, the truth was slowly catching up. Insiders whispered about emergency meetings, discreet visits from doctors, the family quietly being summoned north. Then, on the night of July 18th, the battle ended. The king slipped away peacefully, surrounded by his closest family, his hand resting in Camilla's as William stood silently by his side. In that moment, all the public suspicion and private dread crystallized into a single, irrevocable fact. The reign of King Charles III was over. His struggle, once hidden behind palace gates and gentle smiles, came to its inevitable close. And as the nation wept, the line of succession demanded its next chapter instantly. The crown doesn't wait even when hearts are breaking. As the final breath of King Charles slipped quietly into history, the ancient machinery of monarchy roared to life. There was no pause, no chance to fully absorb the loss. Duty moved faster than grief could catch up. The kingdom might have been wrapped in mourning, but the throne could not remain empty, not even for a day. Centuries of tradition demanded immediacy, the seamless passing of power that Britain's people expected and William now embodied. Within moments of the solemn announcement, the royal household began preparing for the inevitable. The succession laws, clear as scripture and older than memory, left no room for hesitation. The words were whispered and then declared. William was now king. The weight of it settled on him in an instant, heavy enough to buckle even the strongest shoulders. Still, as he stood in those private quarters surrounded by family and aides, there was no choice but to accept what the crown demanded of him. William's eyes, still glassy from tears, held both defiance and devastation when he was told. Those in the room recalled him taking a long breath before murmuring, "So it begins." And in that quiet, the enormity of his father's absence finally collided with the reality of his own role. There would be no more time to simply grieve as a son. He now belonged to the people. Yet, his anguish lingered beneath the surface, breaking through only when he thought no one was watching. Outside, the nation wept alongside him. The scenes that unfolded bore uncanny echoes of Queen Elizabeth's passing. Flags dipped to half-mast, church bells tolled across cities and villages alike, and the streets filled with flowers laid gently at palace gates. Crowds gathered in silence, their sorrow mingling with a strange, cautious hope for what lay ahead. In the voices of those offering condolences, There was mourning for the man who had just departed, and an anxious curiosity about the man who would now lead. And as the sun rose on this fractured yet unbroken monarchy, the public tributes became a mirror of the moment's sorrow, stitched with quiet optimism. Some spoke of Charles's compassion and unwavering sense of duty. Others wondered aloud whether William could carry the same burdens with grace. Candles flickered, prayers were whispered, and even in grief, the people seemed to lean forward into the promise of a new beginning. But this was no ordinary coronation, it was a ceremony born of grief, held in the shadows of loss. At midnight, Britain crowned its new rulers, their tears not yet dry. The ancient bells of Westminster tolled not with the thunder of triumph, but with a hushed reverence that seemed to echo the weight of the moment. This was no coronation steeped in months of planning and pageantry. It was hurried, stripped of spectacle, yet somehow even more profound for its raw intimacy. The monarchy had no choice but to move forward, and so William and Catherine stood together before the altar, the grief of their loss still visible in their eyes. As the crown passed to them in the quiet hours of a sleepless night, there were no throngs of cheering crowds or triumphant fanfare. Instead, the ceremony carried a fragile solemnity, as if the air itself dared not interrupt what was unfolding. The archbishop's voice quivered slightly as he spoke the oaths, his words heavy with both tradition and urgency. William's hands trembled for just a moment as the crown settled upon his head, the enormity of it all pressing down. Catherine, standing by his side, met his gaze with a steady calm, her own crown placed gently atop her hair, not just a symbol of rank, but of shared resolve. Their children George, Charlotte, and Louis watched from the shadows of history, their young faces illuminated by a sense of awe and confusion. George stood the tallest, his expression almost unreadable, though his hands were tightly clasped, as though already carrying the burden of the future. Charlotte's eyes darted between her parents, her quiet strength shining through even in the silence. And Louis, too young to fully understand, reached for his mother's hand in the softest plea for reassurance. Together, they bore witness to a moment that would define not only their family but the fate of the monarchy itself. Behind them, Camilla, now Queen Dowager, offered her quiet support. She did not seek the center of attention, but her presence radiated a quiet solidarity that steadied the room. Her hand rested on the shoulder of William briefly, as if to remind him of the faith his father had placed in him. There was no need for words between them. Duty and grief spoke louder than any blessing could. And as William and Catherine exchanged the briefest of glances after the final vows, a truth passed between them, a silent agreement that they would stand unbroken, no matter what the coming days demanded. Their crowns gleamed under the weight of history, but in their eyes was something deeper: unity, resolve, and the faint flicker of uncertainty that no ceremony could erase. But the crowns on their heads came with questions on their hearts. How would they lead? The smallest shoulders now carried the biggest expectations. In the quiet corners of the palace, as the weight of loss settled heavily on the adults, the children stood unknowingly at the threshold of their own destinies. George, still so young yet already marked by the future, stepped closer to the role fate had etched for him. Watching his father's silent grief and his mother's poised strength, he understood more than anyone realized. His gaze lingered on the crown as it passed to William, and in that unspoken moment, the boy seemed to sense that one day it would rest on his own head. The reality of that responsibility, even cloaked in innocence, settled in his posture a little straighter, a little more deliberate, as though preparing himself to bear it. Beside him, Charlotte revealed her quiet leadership in ways that surprised even those who thought they knew her best. As the family faltered under the crushing weight of ceremony and sorrow, she became the one who comforted her brothers with a hand on their shoulders or a whispered reassurance. When Louis began to cry in confusion during a hushed gathering, it was Charlotte who leaned close and told him that their father needed them to be brave, her words carrying far more gravity than her age should have allowed. Louis, in his innocence, became the unexpected light in the family's darkness. Too young to grasp the full enormity of what had happened, he brought fleeting moments of levity just when they were needed, most asking innocent questions that drew bittersweet smiles from the adults, or clinging to his mother with an honesty that broke through even the heaviest silences. His laughter, though rare in those days, was a fragile reminder that even in loss, life stubbornly continued. William and Catherine, though consumed by their own grief and new duties, shielded the children as best they could from the chaos surrounding them. They carved out quiet moments to explain what was happening, sparing them the sharpest edges of the pain while still helping them understand what was expected of them. In those conversations, it became clear that these children raised between two worlds of tradition and modernity were already being prepared for what lay ahead. Hints of that preparation emerged in subtle ways. George asked pointed questions about his grandfather's reign. Charlotte observed the staff with a perceptive calm that suggested she was learning more than she let on. Even Louis, though still protected by youth, clung to the rituals of the family with surprising seriousness. Together, they formed a fragile but undeniable promise of continuity proof that the monarchy's future was already taking shape in their small, determined hands. Yet even as the family clung to each other, absence loomed. Some chairs at the table remained empty. While Britain mourned, whispers of reconciliation stirred in the shadows. Amid the grief and solemn rituals, one figure stood quietly resolute: Camilla, now Queen Dowager, embodying both strength and sorrow. Though her title had shifted and her role diminished in the public eye, she became an anchor for the family during these turbulent days. Her steady presence alongside William and Catherine reminded the nation of her unwavering loyalty to the late king, and her subtle gestures of support carried a dignity that words could never capture. She did not speak often, but when she did, it was to assure those around her that Charles' wishes were being honored and the family would endure. Yet there were absences that even her calm could not conceal. The empty seats of Harry and Meghan cast long shadows over every gathering, a silent echo of the divisions that had fractured the family long before this moment of reckoning. In the eyes of the public and the press, their absence became more than a personal choice. It became a symbol of a rift that no death, however monumental, seemed able to heal. As the days wore on, cameras lingered on doorways and gates, waiting for any sign of their arrival. Every whisper, every rumor, fanned the flames of speculation. Some claimed quiet talks had already begun behind palace walls, that private calls were being exchanged late at night, testing the possibility of a fragile reconciliation. Others insisted the distance was final, too deep to bridge even now. But the nation, in its grief, seemed willing to hope. Across Britain, flags at half-mast lined streets blanketed with flowers, the air heavy with collective sorrow. Candles burned in church windows. Crowds gathered in silence, their grief mingled with a yearning to see the family whole again. To them, the monarchy was not just about lineage, but about unity. A unity they longed to see restored as the next chapter began. Yet mourning did not shield the country from reality. Behind the scenes, the machinery of government turned with careful precision, bracing for the inevitable ripple effects. The transition of power, though seamless by design, brought its own shocks. Markets wavered under the uncertainty, charities once championed by Charles braced for leadership changes, and questions about Britain's place in the Commonwealth resurfaced. People watched closely, wondering not just how the monarchy would survive, but how it would adapt to a world already so changed. Still, in the midst of the sorrow, one thing became clear: the nation still believed. In its grief, it clung to the idea that William and Catherine could mend what had been broken, that their reign might restore more than just the crown. But behind closed palace doors, a vision for the future was already taking shape, and it looked very different from the past. William and Catherine's reign promised not just continuity but transformation. In the hours following their midnight coronation, whispers inside the palace turned from grief to resolve. The weight of the crown no longer felt like a relic from the past, but a chance to redefine what it meant to lead. From their earliest private discussions, one truth was clear: they would not simply inherit a kingdom, they would rebuild it. William envisioned a monarchy stripped of unnecessary grandeur, more intimate and modern, a reflection of the lives of the people it served. Gone would be the bloated guest lists and opulent ceremonies that once seemed untouchable. Instead, he spoke of simplicity, humility, and purpose, a royal family that was less spectacle and more service. At the heart of this vision lay the same causes that had always burned quietly within him: the environment and mental health. Even during his father's final days, William confided to Catherine that he would carry forward Charles's tireless advocacy for sustainability, but in ways that engaged a younger generation. His Earthshot Prize, once dismissed as symbolic, now became the foundation of a wider campaign, drawing together governments and grassroots movements alike. And alongside this, He vowed to continue breaking the silence around mental health, expanding initiatives that reached into schools, workplaces, and homes, ensuring no one in his realm felt unseen or unheard. Catherine's influence was equally decisive, a presence both elegant and disarmingly human. She wove tradition and modernity seamlessly, proving that empathy was not weakness but strength. Those who watched her closely during the transition saw her leaning into her maternal instincts just as much as her queenly duties. Her speeches carried the gravity of her role, but also the warmth of a mother who understood the pressures of the world outside palace walls. In her hands, royal rituals softened, becoming invitations rather than performances. Perhaps the most striking difference came in how they opened the gates figuratively and literally. The once guarded royal life began to feel less like a distant myth and more like a shared experience. Catherine insisted on releasing candid moments with their children, not as orchestrated photo calls, but as glimpses into a family still learning, still adapting. They allowed the public to see behind the curtain, replacing stiff formality with transparency, as if to say, "We are yours, but we are also real." And always, at the center of it all, was their family. Every policy, every choice, circled back to George, Charlotte, and Louis. William and Catherine vowed to raise them with the awareness of their privilege, but also with the freedom to forge their own paths. Whether they chose public service or private pursuits, the message was clear: they were heirs to a monarchy that valued their happiness as much as their duty. As dawn broke on their reign, the world watched. Could they truly bridge the past and future? From the darkest night rose a new light, a king and queen ready to inspire a generation. The weight of William's journey of son, father, heir had finally culminated in a single, defining moment. Grief had etched itself into his face, yet it was his quiet resolve that shone through. Fatherhood had taught him patience. Loss had taught him humility. Together, they carved a man ready to carry not just the crown, but the hopes of a nation searching for meaning beyond ceremony. What once felt like an abstract destiny now burned with clarity. William was no longer simply fulfilling a role handed to him by birthright. He was shaping it with the steady hands of someone who knew what it meant to endure. Beside him, Catherine's transformation became impossible to ignore. Once the quiet duchess, she now stood as a queen, her presence a testament to resilience forged through storms both public and private. Her strength had always been there, subtle but unwavering, but now it took center stage. Where others might have crumbled under the suffocating expectations, she embodied grace and purpose, not as a figurehead but as a partner in every sense. In her, the monarchy found a heart that beat with the rhythm of its people, a queen who could soothe sorrow yet command respect. Together, their united front at the coronation became a beacon of something larger than both of them. It wasn't just about duty, it was about hope. Standing hand in hand before the altar that had witnessed centuries of power and conflict, they reminded the watching world that even in grief, even amid loss, the future could still be claimed. Their vow was not only to each other but to everyone who had gathered outside palace gates, to those laying flowers in the rain, to children who would one day tell this story as their history. And behind them, their families stood stronger than ever. What might have shattered them, instead, pulled them closer. The children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, formed the quiet foundation of that promise, a living reminder of continuity that transcended even the sharpest pain. Camilla's steadfast support, the whispered prayers of the people, the solemn resolve of the palace staff, all of it bound together in an unspoken agreement. This monarchy would not falter. As the dawn stretched over the kingdom, one truth settled over the realm like sunlight through storm clouds. This would not be the monarchy of yesterday. It would be relatable, compassionate, and alive. A family still learning, still growing, yet utterly committed to carrying their people with them. In the eyes of William and Catherine, Britons saw not just heirs to a throne, but a reflection of themselves. And so begins a chapter of grief and glory, one where the crown endures brighter than ever under King William and Queen Catherine. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.